Before we begin this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Epic Story Spot, and hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our daily life-changing stories. Sophie Miller had grown used to being invisible. At 22, she spent her mornings waiting tables at a cramped corner cafe, balancing trays of burnt coffee and half-empty plates, and her afternoons scrubbing other people's homes just to cover her mother's endless medical bills. She had grown up in foster care after her mother passed away, clutching a single relic from her childhood, a faded quilt stitched with roses in the corners. That quilt was her anchor on lonely nights in the drafty attic apartment she now called home. Her life was small, predictable, and heavy with worry. She longed for something more, some sign that her life could mean more than greasy plates and overdue rent. But the world never seemed to notice her yearning, until the day she stepped into the old house on Willow Street. The mansion loomed at the end of a crooked lane, its windows shuttered, its bricks wrapped in ivy like green chains. The neighborhood kids whispered about it, claiming it was haunted, but Sophie knew better. It wasn't ghosts that made houses feel sad. It was abandonment. Mrs. Hargrave, the wealthy widow who had hired her, had bought the house at an auction. "It's a fixer-upper," the old woman had said, her eyes twinkling as if she knew more than she let on. "I need it cleaned before the renovation crew arrives. Be careful in there, dear. That house has secrets." Sophie laughed nervously and pocketed the heavy brass key. She told herself it was just another cleaning job. But when she pushed open the creaking front door the next morning, the air inside felt different. Heavy, quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dust motes drifted in the shafts of pale light, slicing through cracked shutters. Sheets covered forgotten furniture like silent ghosts. Sophie set down her bucket and mop, then got to work, determined to earn every dollar. She swept the wide, groaning floorboards. She wiped layers of grime from mantels and windowsills. She coughed as clouds of dust filled the air, but she kept going. The house seemed to watch her, its portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring from the walls. By late afternoon, her arms ached. She was on her knees, scrubbing near an enormous oak bookshelf that pressed snugly against the upstairs wall, when she felt it, a faint draft against her ankles. She frowned. There were no windows nearby, no open doors. She pressed her hand along the edge of the bookshelf and felt a faint current of cool air escaping through a tiny seam. "Where are you hiding?" she whispered. The shelf looked solid, carved with twisting vines and tiny roses that almost matched the stitched flowers on her quilt. She pressed one of the roses with her thumb. To her shock, there was a soft click. The bookshelf shuddered, then groaned as it slid back, revealing a narrow gap in the wall. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She shined her phone's flashlight into the darkness and saw a set of stone steps spiraling downward. The smell of damp earth and old paper drifted up. Her common sense told her to call Mrs. Hargrave, but her curiosity was stronger. She slipped inside, her sneakers scraping against the cold stone. The stairs ended in a low chamber, its walls carved from rough stone. Wooden shelves lined the room, sagging under the weight of old tomes, journals, and yellowing manuscripts. Dust filled the air like a fog. In the center stood a heavy oak table, and on it rested a massive trunk with a rusted brass lock. Sophie's pulse thundered in her ears. She ran her fingers along the trunk until she remembered the small wooden box she had found earlier, carved with roses. She pulled it from her pocket and removed the vine-shaped iron key. With shaking hands, she slid the key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a grating snap. The lid creaked open. Inside were stacks of letters, photographs, and old documents tied with faded ribbons. She picked up the first photograph and gasped. A young woman smiled back at her, with the same eyes, the same dimple, her mother. Next to her stood a tall man with silver hair and a proud, kind expression. Sophie's heart lurched. She had seen that face before on billboards across the city. David Whitmore, the billionaire philanthropist. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. She pulled it out. On the cracked screen was a message from an unknown number. Her words glowed in the dim light. "We need to talk." She sank into the chair, staring at the message. Rain hammered on the stone walls above. Why was David Whitmore messaging her? And how did he even know she existed? For the rest of the evening, she barely slept. She tried to imagine what it all meant. The hidden room, the journals, the name Whitmore etched into the plaque she and Dr. Clark had found, and her mother's name alongside it. The next day, she returned to the house with Dr. Clark. Together, they pored over the journals in the secret room. Pages filled with coded notes, maps of hidden routes, and stories of families escaping under cover of night. The mansion had once been a station on the Underground Railroad. Her mother had been part of it. Dr. Clark was almost shaking with excitement. "Sophie, this is history. These documents are proof that your family was at the center of it all. Do you realize how important this is?" Sophie touched her mother's name on one of the letters, her throat tight. She wanted this to be remembered. She wanted their story told. Before they could discuss it further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the house again. Heavy, deliberate. Sophie froze. She knew who it was. The man in the dark coat appeared in the doorway, his eyes glinting in the beam of his flashlight. "I warned you," he said softly. "Hand over the key and the letters. You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Dr. Clark stepped in front of Sophie, her voice firm. "This is a historical find. You can't just bury it." The man's jaw tightened. "Do you think this is about history? The name on the papers, Whitmore, is tied to things you don't understand. My employers don't want this story told. If you're smart, you'll walk away." Sophie's heart pounded, but she forced herself to speak. "I'm not walking away. This is my mother's story, and I'm going to share it." The man took another step forward. Sophie clutched the quilt against her chest, her fingers brushing the soft roses her mother had sewn. She remembered the words carved into the table, "Protect our story." In that moment, she realized what she had to do. With a sudden burst of courage, she grabbed one of the dusty lanterns from the shelf, swung it, and knocked the man's flashlight from his hand. Darkness swallowed the room. "Run," she whispered to Dr. Clark. They scrambled back through the narrow passage, the man cursing and stumbling behind them. Sophie's heart hammered as they burst into the upstairs hallway, shoving the bookshelf back into place, just as his fists pounded on the other side. They didn't stop running until they were outside in the cold night air, gasping for breath under the rain. Dr. Clark clutched Sophie's arm. "We have to go to the police. Tonight." But before Sophie could answer, headlights swept across the lawn. A sleek black car rolled up the driveway, its engine humming quietly. The rear door opened, and a tall man stepped out, holding an umbrella. Even through the rain, Sophie recognized him instantly. The silver hair, the sharp jawline, the same eyes she saw in the photograph. "Mr. Whitmore, Dr." Clark whispered. The billionaire walked toward them, his shoes crunching on the gravel. He looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and his eyes softened in a way that startled her. "Sophie," he said gently, "I sent you the message. I think you're my granddaughter." The world seemed to tilt. Sophie clutched the quilt tighter, her breath catching in her throat. For years, she had wondered who her father's family was, why no one had ever come for her. And now, in the pouring rain, the man who had built half the city stood before her, claiming to be her blood. Dr. Clark looked between them, her face pale. If that's true, then this discovery belongs to her. Whitmore's gaze flicked toward the house. His voice was thick with emotion. "I know what's hidden inside. My father, your great-grandfather, was part of it. He used that house to hide families fleeing slavery. Your mother found out, and she wanted to tell the world. But when she disappeared, everything was lost. Until you found it." Sophie's knees felt weak. So the man downstairs, Whitmore's jaw tightened, an old business associate, someone who doesn't want our family name tied to this. He thinks it would tarnish our empire. But he's wrong. The truth doesn't ruin us. It saves us. He looked at Sophie again, his expression softening. You did the right thing. You honored your mother. And now it's time to finish what she started. Weeks later, Sophie stood in front of a camera crew inside the restored Willow Street mansion. The hidden library had been carefully preserved, every book cataloged, every letter documented. Dr. Clark had contacted a network, and soon a documentary was in production, The Secret Rose Room. Sophie sat in the study, the carved oak table before her, the quilt draped across her shoulders. She spoke about her mother, about the long nights in the orphanage when that quilt was her only comfort. She told the story of the hidden room, the discovery of the journals, the chase through the darkness, and the night she met David Whitmore. When the documentary aired, it spread across the nation. People wept as they learned about Eleanor Whitmore's courage, about the families who had found safety in the secret room, about the young woman who uncovered it all while scrubbing floors. Letters poured in from around the world, from students, teachers, and even descendants of those who had once been sheltered in the mansion's hidden chamber. They thanked Sophie for giving voice to a story that had nearly been lost to time. The Historical Society honored her with an award. The City Council declared the Willow Street house a protected landmark. Tourists began arriving by the busload, eager to step into the Rose Room and see the carved words on the oak table with their own eyes. And then came the biggest surprise. At a press conference, David Whitmore stood beside Sophie. Cameras flashed as he spoke. For too long, my family's legacy has been hidden in the shadows. But thanks to Sophie, my granddaughter, the truth is free. And I am proud to stand beside her. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Sophie barely heard them. All she could feel was David's hand gently resting on her shoulder, steady and warm. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. After the cameras left, David pulled her aside. Sophie, I know I can never make up for the years you spent without us. But I want you to know this. You are family. This legacy is yours as much as it is mine. And I want to help you build the future you deserve. Sophie looked down at her paint-stained hands. I've always dreamed of opening a bookstore, she whispered. A place where kids like me, kids who feel forgotten, can come and read and maybe find their own stories. David smiled. Then let's do it together. Months later, Sophie stood in the doorway of a brand-new bookstore cafe. Warm lights glowed from the windows, spilling across the sidewalk. Inside, shelves lined the walls, filled with books old and new. Her paintings, sweeping murals of roses climbing toward the sky, covered the walls. Children from the orphanage filled the space, their laughter echoing off the shelves as they flipped through picture books and shared cookies at small tables. Sophie moved between them, kneeling to help a young girl sound out a difficult word, handing a shy boy a sketchbook and telling him to draw whatever he dreamed of. She felt the weight of her mother's quilt on her shoulders, the stitches rough but comforting, each one a reminder of love, sacrifice, and legacy. And in the corner, sitting quietly with a cup of tea, David Whitmore watched with tears in his eyes. He had spent his life building skyscrapers of glass and steel, but it was here, in this little bookstore cafe, that he saw the truest monument to his daughter's memory. Sophie stood, looked around at the children reading, the families laughing, the historian Dr. Clark speaking to a reporter in hushed, excited tones, and she felt something she had never felt before: peace. Her life had been filled with loss, with loneliness, with doubt. But all along, her mother's quilt had carried a message stitched into every thread. Kindness matters. Stories matter. And sometimes, when you least expect it, doing the right thing opens doors you never even knew existed. She turned to the camera crew, filming the final shots for the documentary, and smiled through tears. If you ever find yourself standing at crossroads, she said softly, choose kindness. Choose honesty. You never know. It might just change your life the way it changed mine. The camera zoomed in on Sophie, her mother's quilt glowing in the soft lamplight, the children's laughter in the background, the shelves of books standing tall like guardians of memory. And as the screen faded to black, Sophie's voice lingered. Protect your story, because one day, it might be the treasure that saves someone else. Thank you so much for joining us for She Cleaned an Old House and Discovered a Secret Room story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Epic Story Spot, and share this story with someone who loves inspiring true stories. We post new stories every single day, so come back tomorrow for another life-changing journey.